As sports history fans, we often reminisce about the legends. Willis Reed limping onto the NBA Finals court, Kurt Schilling's bloody sock, Kerry Strug's courageous dismount, and so many more. These moments often define sports history. But what about the countless injuries that did not become legends, or careers that were derailed due to inadequate care? That's where this episode's sponsor comes in. Introducing to you, ILP Sports Consultants, your trusted sports injury partner, available 24/7. Brian Maelli at ILP Sports Consultants has over 20 years of experience in the orthopedic and sports medicine industry, and he has worked with athletes across the gamut, from youth to amateurs, professionals, in almost every sport played in the United States of America, accommodating athletes at every stage of their career. This adaptability ensures that ILP services are perfectly tailored to your skill level, no matter where you are in your athletic journey. With ILP, you are in control. Choose the steps that matter most to you. Diagnosis, treatment plan, recovery, or the whole journey. ILP services are tailored to your unique needs. Rushing for care is a common pitfall, leading to future problems. ILP Sports Consultants helps you make the right decisions, ensuring that you receive timely and safe care. And here's a bonus. Brian hosts the Injured List podcast, sharing insights and athlete stories you won't want to miss. Whether you're a concerned parent or grandparent, or an athlete yourself seeking guidance, ILP Sports Consultants is your beacon of hope in sports injury management. Visit ilpsports.com today. That's the letters ilpsports.com. ILP Sports Consultants, where your well-being is the priority and your recovery is the mission. Choose ILP Sports Consultants for a healthier sports journey, helping you get back in the game the smart way.
Blog Talk Radio.
Tonight we'll go back in time to seasons past, when 22 men graced the rugged fields of yesterday, fighting for one more first down, one more yard gain, one final score which would bring victory after 60 minutes of battle on the gridiron. Tonight we'll explore the world of Gridiron Greats. Welcome to Gridiron Greats Football History and its Memorabilia on the Gridiron Greats Publishing and Broadcasting Network, in conjunction with Swick Enterprises. And we're live from the Wallingford, Connecticut home of Gridiron Greats Magazine. I'm Bob Swick, publisher and editor of Gridiron Greats Magazine, and I'll be your host for the show. Gridiron Greats is the only publication in America which focuses upon the history and memorabilia of the North American football game since its inception in 1869. We'll cover 150 plus years of football history and memorabilia. And you can find us on the web at GridironGreatsMagazine.com. It is at this time I'd like to introduce my co-host, who's a senior contributing writer to Gridiron Greats Magazine, a football memorabilia historian specializing in pre-World War II items, in particular Red Grange, and also Seattle Seahawk items, in particular Steve Largent. He hails from Portland, Oregon, Mr. Joe Squires. Joe, welcome back and welcome to the show tonight.
Your voice is like music to my ears, Bob. It's so good to be back. I wanted to say thanks to Jeff Payne for splitting duties with me while I was handling, business and personal, and thanks for keeping the captain in line while I was gone. I loved the shows you guys did. They were They were really good shows. Great topics. Jeff obviously knows a lot more about football than I do. So just thank you very much for keeping the seat warm, Jeff.
I do appreciate Jeff filling in, and as I tell everyone has their own niche, their own specialty in football history and memorabilia. And Joe, by far and wide, you have a lot of knowledge in a lot of different areas in football, especially Grange and your Seahawks there. So don't ever underestimate any knowledge that we have in this hobby, because we all share it and we all try to learn more and grow with it at the same time. And before we get on topic here with what you and I are going to talk about, I want to interject the issue of now the XFL is gone. And I picked up a little more information on it over the past 24 hours from a very reliable source. They did declare bankruptcy, which I was kind of surprised at, but I think the reason why they did it was basically to protect themselves, because they had a lot of contractual agreements with the stadiums, so on and so forth, and with the advertisers at the same time. So I think that was probably the only way out that they could see from the closure of the league, only 5 games in. And the other big issue, which I think is kind of avoided right now, is that they will have rescheduling conflicts down the road if they say they want to try to play in June or whatever, because I know a couple of the stadiums are being used by other venues for sports and concerts and the like, and so on and so forth. So I got a feeling it was just too much to go wrong all at once. And it's a shame, because I kind of liked it. I thought it was an interesting game to watch. It was something different.
Totally.
Just as the Alliance of Football was last spring, that didn't make it. This was the same deal, only with a little more innovation and a little more uniqueness to it at the same time.
I watched a couple games. I liked what I saw. I mean, I love going to Portland, Oregon. Here has an arena football team, or they did. And I liked going to see that. I mean, it's athletes. I mean, the difference between college and pro is so noticeable. When you go to both games.
Oh, right.
It's just the timing is just so much better, and you can see it in the XFL. You can see it in arena football. It is a half a step behind NFL, but still, it's professional. It was pretty fun to watch.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, you mentioned arena football, indoor football. I still like indoor football. I just think it's kind of cool to watch. I think it's unique. Again, guys are just hoping somehow they're noticed or they excel to the point that somebody in the NFL or the CFL wants to pick them up. And you look at Kurt Warner. That's the classic story. The man was incredible in the arena game, and he found success in the NFL at the same time. So it's a great story. And again, indoor football now is very different than it used to be. I don't even know if it's going to operate this year. I got a feeling it may or may not. And they're very splintered as far as the leagues are concerned, because the Arena Football League, I don't believe, is in existence anymore. And interesting to note, on Gridiron Greats, we have a writer who contributes on occasion, Zach Tubb, who was a very well-known indoor football player. And he's followed, and I've had several conversations with him about the indoor game, and he brought a very good insight to it over his career, and also with seeing what happened to the league itself. But like anything, if you don't have fans, you don't have sponsors, you don't have ads, you're not going to survive. I mean, it's as simple as that. Unfortunately, that's the reality of our economy. So
I don't know anyone who's ever seen an arena football game on TV. So there's 1/3 of your revenue plus, in broadcasting, and another third of your revenue in advertising. So it's you're relying on tickets and concessions. in Arena.
Right. And it's a tough market. I know we had a team here in Connecticut for a very short period of time. I got to see one game. And, it's fun to me. I mean, it was a cheap night out and had some fun seeing the game. They saw some, relatively good plays. Obviously, like you said, they are definitely a half to full step behind a regular professional team. But, it's still interesting to see and interesting to watch at the same time. But getting back on script here, there are a couple major auctions going on right now, which there's some very, very interesting unopened items being offered in both the REA auction and also in a heritage auction that's going on. And, Joe, why don't you lead off? You sent me some information, and I was looking at it before the show on the heritage items, and I'm going to switch back here on them.
Oh, man, fever. I mean, with, Leland's ending, obviously,
right.
Love of the Game, sponsor Gridiron Greats, just ended earlier, I think, on Saturday. And you've got REA coming up and Heritage. Heritage auctions so much stuff off. It seems like they have something firing off once a week, whether it's books or whatever. But in about 26 days, an auction coming up with a tremendous amount of unopened. And I got to say, Bob, one of my favorite and most memorable shows we've ever done is the show. We had 2 back-to-back shows. We brought on some unopened wax experts, and it was eye-opening. Yep. It was scary, but definitely one of the most memorable shows we've done. So I have a small amount of unopened still in my collection. Nothing serious, but whenever I see an auction like this, getting ready to fire off, it makes me think about dipping my pool or my toe back into the pool. But I know there's so much tainted unopened. It's scary, but coming up in Heritage, like I said, in about 3 weeks, starts off with 2000, with 2000 playoff contender football. That's the Tom Brady one.
Right.
It has a Tom Brady rookie card and that goes for 6 figures. And that box is at $5,200. There's a 54 Bowman one, penny pack. I didn't realize there's 120 open packs in a box for penny pack. That's pretty interesting. First series, 61 Fleer. First series in 61 Fleer is the rarest. It's the hardest. It's the NFL cards versus the AFL cards in the second series. Excuse me. And then next up, 62 Tops. These are all BBC, certified shrink wrapped with their modern, logoed shrink wrap. $24,000 for 24 packs and a wax packs display box. $1,000 a pack for 62 Tops football. Pretty incredible.
It is.
You roll on down. We got some Bob Swick, first year as a young mustachioed child, opening up 65 Philly, 24 pack. That'd be a good birthday gift for you, Bob, just to get you a wax packs with 24 unopened packs. Just set it up and it'd be just take you back to your childhood, walking in and plunk a dime down.
I could take one pack a year each birthday, figuring if I could make it to my mid-80s, I could open that whole box. 1 pack a year, and I'd be all set. Yeah, I noticed.
I'll pass the hat on VFC. That box is at 9,000 right now. Maybe we can get a couple people to chip in for the captain's fund. 68 Tops, 70 Tops, 72 Tops, 75 Tops, 2,600, 76 Tops. Just incredible. And it goes all the way down to the last one of consequence, 76 Tops, with 36 wax packs, Walter Payton's rookie card at 6,500. And there's a lot of graded wax packs in there too. Just, man, and you wonder if this all came from one collector who's been collecting this stuff over the years, because this is easily going to be, $200,000 worth of unopened wax. It's vintage football. That's firing off.
Yeah, by all means. And in the REA auction, talking about Brady, and I got I got the REA up right now on my screen, and I'm trying to find it. He had, and Brian Dwyer, who was a guest on our show, he's got a 2000 playoff contenders, 8,500 right now, with 11 bids. They still have time running on that. And there's also now a, I'm trying to find it. There was another notable wax box, which I thought was kind of interesting to see coming up. Oh,
yeah, they had a lot of
this is
70s
interesting.
ones, I noticed.
Interesting to me, 1979 unopened wax box and an open cello box. Now, to me, the 79 set really doesn't get a lot of favor in the hobby for whatever reason, but very strong prices for that. But the other thing, thinking of you, some interesting uncut sheets, including a 71 Topps football game proof sheet, which is, to me, very unpriced right now. Only a couple $100 on
You're not supposed to out. You're not supposed to out auctions, especially with uncut sheet stuff that I'm interested in.
But again, I think just given market conditions and given the economy right now, it'd be interesting to see where a lot of this stuff ends up going. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. And then the other one, but I think you have this already, the 61 Fleer second series. There's an uncut sheet in there in our.
I've been with COVID-19 locking us down. I've been going through a lot of my uncut sheets. I realized I have probably a dozen of each of the 4 series from 81 football, 81 Topps. I probably have 10 second series 61 Fleer uncut sheets. To the point where I know which row that so they obviously cut them differently because the top row is different. There's about 3 different top rows for the sheets. It's pretty interesting. But man, I've got way too many uncut sheets, Bob. They are hard to handle.
Well, they're difficult to store unless you got and I know how you store them, and you got a pretty good setup there. But at the same time, I mean, they take up room, and you got to figure out where to keep them. You got to have proper storage and/or good draws or good framing if you're going to display any of them at the same time. I remember years ago, and I know I've mentioned this before. I was at a card show. This was probably in the late '80s, and a dealer had these. There were 6-card and 9-card strips of 1960 Fleer football, and I ended up buying from them. And to me, they look like printer scrap more than anything else. And I kept them for a long time, and then I started selling them. Actually, probably over the last 10 years, I got rid of them. And they were interesting display piece at the same time, interesting conversation piece. But again, to me, they were more printer scrap than anything else. You know what I mean? So, but these are the real sheets. So, and what you have are the real sheets. They're the actual pieces that we're looking at with regards to, how these cards were actually printed and where they were cut, so on and so forth. Fascinating history of those football cards.
Gives you so much insight into a set. And I keep referring to that, that article I did for Gridiron several years ago on the 57 Topps football and the Zeke Bratkowski card. And the minute you see the sheet, the uncut sheet, and you see Zeke in the number 1 top left position on the card, on the sheet, you realize why Zeke Bratkowski is such a hard card in the 57 Topps set.
Right.
But
I mean, it puts everything in perspective as a collector. This is why certain cards are more difficult than others. And again, the cutting process itself has evolved so dramatically over the years to the extent today it's basically laser cut from the sheets. Yeah. And the cutting machines and printing today are dramatically different than they were 40, 50 years ago. So it's a completely different process of printing, so on and so forth. So it's amazing to see, and amazing to see the history of it. And again, the one thing I was going through some of my cards, I was putting a bunch of duplicates I had in numerical order, and I was going through my 1973 Topps football, and I probably got about a good, I would say 700-800 extras, duplicates of them. I can't believe how many miscuts I have that I found. And I remember years ago, I used to take miscuts and I used to throw them out because I didn't like them. But I didn't realize I had saved all these over the years. And it's kind of interesting to see, the process they use to cut them and how bad or how I don't know what a good word is, how missed a lot of the quality control was seeing those cards enter packs, you know what I mean, or vending boxes. So it's kind of interesting to see a miscut card, and they're more prevalent basically in the 60s and 70s, obviously not so much in the 80s and or the 90s. So very interesting to look at and view. We're back to
I love it, and I've said it 100 times. No one's going to reseal, trim, recolor, or doctor an uncut sheet. I mean, it's they're not making anymore. I can't say the same thing for a lot of other collectibles. So I mean, I've really settled into my uncut sheet collection, and we moved into our new office about a year ago. So now I have probably a dozen uncut sheets that adorn my walls from my 48 leaf to 57. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean they're beautiful to look at. I mean you're really seeing the history of football cards when you're looking at an uncut sheet like that. It's truly amazing, to say the least. All right, at this time our guest is ready, and I'd like to introduce him to our audience. I'd like to welcome our special guest. He's a former sports writer, a member of the Professional Football Researchers Association, and he's author of 3 different football books. The NFL in the 1970s, Pro Football's Most Important Decade. His second book, The Year the Packers Came Back, Green Bay's 1972 Resurgence. And his latest book, which is going to be reviewed in the upcoming issue of Gridiron Greats magazine, which will be out hopefully in the next week or so. America's trailblazing middle linebacker, the story of NFL Hall of Famer Willie Lanier. He hails from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I'd like to welcome to our show this evening Mr. Joe Squires. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bob and Joe, how's it going?
We're good. Excellent.
Okay.
Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thanks. I'm glad to be on. I don't hail from Oak Ridge, but that's where I'm living at now.
I'll say, okay, let me rephrase that. He lives in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Welcome to the show. You're from Pennsylvania, right?
Yes, I am. Originally from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, okay. All right. I should have started with that, but I just go by what the bios tell me, and that's it. All right, let's lead off. Joe, how did you get started writing about football?
How did I get started? Well, I guess it started from just as a kid falling in love with the sport in 1971 and watching it religiously every Sunday afternoon and every Monday night. Of course, I was only in the 3rd grade in 1971, and if you had parents like mine, you were lucky to get to stay up long enough to see the end of halftime highlights on Monday Night Football. And, because like they had this unusual notion that they wanted it was a school night. Well, anyway, I just, when you have a bunch of friends that love football and you're a kid, you just, it becomes a part of you. And so I just grew up loving it. And, by the time I was in high school, I was writing for the school paper, and I thought, it was something that I enjoyed doing because by that time I enjoyed a lot of different sports. But I always knew in the back of my mind I probably won't be able to make a real good living at this because there's only so many, Ray Didingers out there, and you really have to be phenomenal to reach that level. And so, but I did it for a couple of, small town newspapers for really a total of 6 years, and made a lot of friends and still in touch with a lot of these folks that I, worked with at that time, and got a chance to cover the Philadelphia Eagles a few times, and that was great. And, eat the press box food, so, but, I like to eat. It's like my second favorite thing. But but I just it never left me. That love of football never left me. And I'm 57 now, and I enjoy it just as much as I did when I was a kid. Now, I heard you guys talking about the XFL earlier, and I enjoyed watching that. Friend of mine who was an assistant coach for the Houston Roughnecks this spring, Bill Bradley, he's in his 70s now, and he's actually the subject of my fourth book, which will be, it'll be published sometime in another couple of years, I hope. But I enjoyed all kinds of football, really, and since I was a kid. So, hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. You're in good company, Joe. You're talking to two guys who grew up sitting around watching football too. So,
yeah. I mean, you guys know as well as I do that when we were young, you didn't have cable television in those days. You had we had seven channels in Pennsylvania, and 3 of them came in okay.
Yeah. I know that well. Just to back up a bit and off script a bit also, it's very difficult, and with the contraction in media as far as print media is concerned, for any type of sports writer to really survive. So a lot of them are publishing their own blogs, their own columns, their own websites, so on and so forth. So it's a difficult way to make a living. And I know I had a good friend of mine I went to college with. One of my degrees that I have was in journalism, and he basically just covered high school sports his entire career. Now it's tough because there's no high school sports going on. So basically, he's just trying to do review columns and stories about games from years gone by. The team championships locally, so on and so forth. So it's a tough situation. So I see a lot of sports writers. Sports writers actually writing books now more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. And there's only a few Peter Kings out there, and even Sports Illustrated.
Yep.
I don't know if we're going to see the end of that publication anytime soon, but it may happen with the computer age that we're living in right now. So.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I'm a print guy. I still got to read the daily paper, which is basically, fading rapidly, especially the local paper. And I feel bad because, my local paper is now 18, 20 pages an issue, especially now with basically no news going on. And I would think within another generation, it may be gone altogether because of so many people getting their news by way of computer these days. So. Yeah.
Yep, totally agree. Hey, Joe, I wanted to ask you about your one of your previous books, The NFL in the 70s, Pro Football's Most Important Decade. And my question is, there's a young receiver out of Seattle named Steve Largent. What impact do you think he had on the NFL in the 70s?
You know what? He was he came into the league at the exact right time because he was an original Seahawk. 1976 was their first year. Got his feet wet, and he got a chance to, go up against defenses that were still playing bump and run defenses at that time, and were also, being able to chuck him after 5 yards. Well, a couple of years later in '78, the rules change. And the passing game just opens up for everybody. And then he really got to show his skills. He's in the Hall of Fame now for a reason. He had great hands even before the rule changes, and it just showcased how great he was. Once those rule changes came, if you watch the films, he jukes a lot of people out, and he gets open. He's something else.
That is exactly the right answer, Joe. Thank you.
I've never met him. Grant, I've never met him. Never had the privilege of meeting him or even interviewing him. But there's a lot of talk today about guys getting in the Hall of Fame that probably shouldn't be. Well, they're not talking about Steve Largent.
Bob, I'm gonna have to get that soundbite right there as my ringtone. They're not talking about Steve Largent. I like that. Well said, Joe. No, you're going back to your book and the serious question. I grew up watching Seahawk football, and Steve Largent was my childhood hero. So other than a restraining order, I'd like to meet him again one of these days.
Well, but you know what? He had the exact right quarterback throwing to him too. Jim Zorn was able to with that sprint option that they had running, he was able to get plenty of free time in that pocket where he could find guys like Largent. And I thought Zorn was way ahead of his time. I did.
Except when he became the head coach of the Redskins.
Well, you know what? Coaching's different. Coaching's different than,
totally. I'm kidding. He got lucky. There was a game of musical chairs that went on there in the Redskins. He went from a quarterback coach, somebody got fired. He became offensive coordinator. Somebody got fired, and he became head coach. He's the Gerald Ford of head coaches. Just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
I don't know who said this. I can't remember, but I remember that when the great Baltimore Colt wide receiver Raymond Berry became head coach of, I guess it was New England, and New England was having a tough year, and somebody asked somebody else why isn't Berry that good, and somebody said, well, he's coaching them, he's not catching them anymore. So
yeah, exactly.
But obviously, you've mentioned a few things. You were in third grade in 1971. So, I mean, other than living in it, the topic of the 70s, why write a book about an entire decade of football like that?
Well, it was kind of like a moment in time where when I was growing up, I didn't have really any responsibility. I had fun. I, enjoyed the time. I started going to high school in the fall of 77. And so, it was just a memorable time for me where I didn't have to pay bills and things like that. And I also remembered that the game, it just seemed like it was a fun game back at that time, and it was enjoyable, and there's the memories that I had from it. And then I started looking, I didn't write about the 70s in the NFL until many years afterwards, but I started doing kind of like a quasi-comparison of what could I remember from the decades before the 70s and the decades after, and how could I compare the two, all those to the 70s? And to me, there wasn't any comparison. I mean, even different types of household names that we know of today, that we knew of back then, we still know today. I mean, you're still able to watch Joe Namath selling stuff on, different things on commercials today. And, a lot of people don't realize this, but all these years later, the Pro Football Hall of Fame has more articles written about Joe Namath than any other pro football player, including guys like Tom Brady and Joe Montana. It's incredible, and his last year was 77. So, and then of course the great events, the Immaculate Reception, the Hail Mary pass, the Holy Roller, the Sea of Hands game. I could go on and on. So I just didn't think that there was anything that the 80s or the 90s could compare with all those things. So I finally decided
the games that are synonymous in today's football, the butt fumble and the tuck rule. So that's a good point.
And you know what? I think that if you went out into the street and asked somebody, do you know of, name for me 10 football players that played last year, just an average person, and now name for me 10 football players that played in the 70s, bet you that they're able to do the latter before they can do the former.
Right.
Very good point.
That's very true.
Very
true. And again,
Terry Bradshaw.
Well,
Joe.
you've got Bradshaw. Yeah, you've got Bradshaw on Sunday afternoons when there is football, when there's not coronavirus, and these are guys that probably, John Madden lasted a very long time after. The highest winning percentage of any pro coach ever. He's known today for broadcasting, but he was a great coach.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
It was the 70s. There was just so much that I wanted to. Plus, in the when I was writing that book, there were a couple of books out there that were written about the 70s, but they were more feature books. They weren't really comprehensive, and I wanted to write a year-by-year comprehensive book that would have as much factual information in it as possible. And I decided to do that, and fortunately I found a publisher who was willing to publish it. So.
Yeah. And you're right, because I did enjoy it, and I'm pretty sure I put in my review for that book that I enjoyed the year-by-year look, which wasn't done in other books on the 1970s. And again, when anybody writes a book, they say, well, I'm going to write a book. Okay, well, what are you writing a book about? What are you focusing on? So on and so forth. And you hit on the key word, comprehensive. There wasn't really any comprehensive view that we had of that time frame. We had a lot of different information everywhere, but we didn't have that, year-by-year look from 70 up to 79. So
I sent a copy of it to the Pro Football Hall of Fame president, Mr. David Baker, and he sent me a letter back. He sent me a letter back saying, "Thanks so much. I really like the book. When is your comprehensive look of the 80s and the 90s coming out?" I bust out laughing.
Nice.
You're going to have a long wait, Mr. Baker. But let somebody else tackle that one. No pun intended.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about my favorite book that you wrote, and it's no surprise to anybody. You wrote the book the year the Packers came back, Green Bay's 1972 resurgence, a unique year in Packer history, a unique coach, a unique team. I was never, ever a big fan of Dan Devine for a variety of reasons. But what you wrote about in that book, to me, just made that season come alive and really gave a lot of different insight to that particular team for the Packers, and really was almost it was definitely a false hope for Packer fans trying to get out of the doldrums of only a few seasons off, not being in the big game, not winning, so on and so forth. And there was a logical letdown after Lombardi left. Yeah, how do you replace the Lombardi? Well, you really didn't replace Lombardi until how many years later, when you actually had better coaching in there, so on and so forth. So give me some background, or give our audience some background on this, why you wrote the book, so on and so forth.
Well, first of all, it was the same era, of course, the 70s, that I was really interested in writing in. And then the more research I did on it, I realized, that was a winnable game, that playoff game, to the Redskins. They lost 16-3. And I knew that the Packers had only won 4 games the previous year in 1971. So I thought about it. How does a team go from 4-8-2 or something like that? I think that's what they were, to 10-4 overnight in an era where throwing the ball isn't common. It's more of a running game back at that time. Your starting quarterback is Scott Hunter, definitely not going to be one of those guys who are going to go to the Hall of Fame. Maybe as a visitor, but not as a enshrinee. And then you didn't have any really good wide receivers for him to throw to. Their best offensive guard gets injured early in the year when the head coach decides to turn him into a defensive tackle overnight, right before the start of the season. And they still won their division against the Minnesota Vikings, a very good team in the early 70s still. So the Packers had a running game, Brockington in 1971, and then MacArthur Lane comes in 72. But everybody knows they're going to run the ball. Well, shouldn't they be able to stop them if they know they're going to run the ball? Well, 10 times they couldn't. They won 10 games. And they played really good competition. They beat the defending world champion Cowboys. They beat another playoff team, the 49ers. They beat another playoff team at that time, the Cleveland Browns. So they did not have a soft schedule. Now, granted, at that time, the Detroit Lions, a divisional rival, were still a good team. So they had a tough schedule, and they still won. But I started to wonder, well, why did they lose to the Redskins? And I'm thinking, the Redskins, they weren't really great at that time. I mean, they had a lot of overaged players. So I started to talk to people and different Packer fans, and then I started to interview certain players and talk about an eye-opener. When I got, the first actual player that I interviewed for the book was Dave Robinson. I interviewed other Packer players and talked to them a little bit, but I sat down with Dave Robinson for about 2 hours, and it was like, oh my God, how in the world did Dan Devine become a head pro football coach?
Yeah.
I just couldn't figure it out, and I didn't even I couldn't even write everything that Dave said because he asked me not to print certain stuff.
Yeah.
But he did tell me one story that was kind of unique. You remember the movie Rudy with the Notre Dame? Okay, well, Dan Devine at that time had migrated on to being a head coach at Notre Dame. And when that movie came out, Devine's relatives, I think by that time Devine may have passed, I'm not sure, but the relatives threatened to sue the Walt Disney Company because the movie apparently, according to them, painted Dan in a bad light. And the producers told the family members, look, we're going with what we got. If you want to sue us, you can. But if you want to sue us, we'll put in all the stuff that we didn't keep in. And they dropped the suit overnight. So you can't even imagine. You can't imagine how poor of a coach this guy was and why he was. I mean, now granted, he was successful at Missouri before he got to Green Bay, but they just made the wrong choice. And then I started talking to other players. I talked to Brockington. I talked to Scott Hunter, and I'm thinking, wow, there's a story here. Even the PR director at that time, Chuck Lane, told me, you really this is a story that needs to be written. And I said, okay. So I started writing it, and I sent it to the publisher, and they said, well, your first book, the 70s in the NFL, did so well, we'll give you a chance with this one. So they it may not have ever seen the light of day were it not for the initial 70s book. And Mike Holmgren, who wrote the foreword to it, I sent him a copy of the 70s book, and I asked him to write the foreword to the Packers book, and he did. And I think if I had not had started out by actually writing a book about the 70s, I don't know that he would have. But, so it was, the 70s book was like the turnstile that got me into the stadium, and now I'm in there. The Packers book, for me, it's my favorite book out of the three because I'm so close to the subject. I don't know of anybody, I don't know of any employed American to this day who hasn't at least at one time had a bad boss. I don't know of any. And I'm right there with them. And I just saw so many similarities between Dan Devine and bad bosses.
And it's interesting. It's interesting to me because this was the type of book, and I read a lot of football books, so on and so forth, and I do a lot of reviews of books. And there's a lot of books I get. I don't review them because I don't think they're worthy of reviewing. But your book on the Packers, and I don't deny I'm a big Packers fan. I mean, I basically sat down one night, and now it's 10:30 at night. Brenda's saying, "We're going to shut the light off and go to bed," and I said, "Well, I got to finish this book because, I mean, this is amazing. This is everything I ever thought. How bad the Packers were coached by Devine. I'm finally seeing the real evidence of telling me Devine was a horrible coach for the Packers. Why did they ever pick him is beyond me. And now here's the real story. They did. Go ahead.
I was right there with you because every time I would talk to a different player and they would tell me more stories, I was like, "Oh my God!" I mean, and then people were Facebooking with me who had connections to other coaches and things like that, and the stories they told me, and I'm thinking, "Holy cow! He's not just a bad coach, but he's dishonest." So, oh my God! So anyway. What scared me was that I got a message, online message from one of Devine's relatives, and then I started having Rudy flashbacks, and I'm thinking, oh no. And so he basically said, I can't wait to read your book, and so I sent him my telephone number. I said, please call me before you buy a copy. Because I kind of wanted to soften the blow as much as I could to him, but he never called me, and to this day I don't know what happened. If he liked it, if he hated it, whatever. But I never,
they're basically protecting the family member, and I can understand that. But there's a real story there about his ineptness to me there, and also in Notre Dame at the same time. It's just. It's nuts. Well, it's crazy.
Like Chuck Lane said, if you're going to be able to bench Joe Montana, then that kind of tells you how great of a player evaluator you are. And and that's what Devine did. I mean, Joe Montana, what did he? 3 Super Bowl MVPs, 4 Super Bowl championships, 0 Super Bowl losses. Yeah, I think Montana's pretty good quarterback.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, your follow-up book to that, Joe, was a book on Willie Lanier. I mean, obviously Hall of Fame, amazing, middle linebacker, but that's a pretty specific topic, for a kid from Pennsylvania. How did you decide to write a book on him?
Okay, here goes the story. I was driving up north to go to the Hall of Fame to do research on the 72 Packers book when a friend of mine who works at NFL Films, Chris Willis, emailed me, and he asked me to email his publisher because she was looking for another topic. And so I did, and she told me what she was looking for. She was looking for a football story that had a social bent to it. And, of course, Willie Lanier was the first African-American middle linebacker in pro football history. So I threw that idea at her, and she asked me to write up some stuff, see what the editorial board of the publisher was Roman and Littlefield, what they thought about it. And they liked it a lot. But I made the mistake of not asking Willie Lanier first whether he'd be willing to participate. I learned a valuable lesson. Willie said no. So, okay, I like baseball. I asked him a second time. He said no. I asked him a third time, lo and behold. And he started getting a little miffed. And I figured, you know what? Willie's no means no. And I don't want Willie to rupture my spleen. So I basically, I gave up after the third attempt. But fortunately for me, I had, my friend Chris Willis, who had plenty of NFL Films interview transcripts. I also have a friend, John Kendall, at the Hall of Fame, and spent a whole day up there just basically scouring all the microfilm and microfiche that I could on articles that were written about Rip Willie. Turns out I had plenty of football information on Willie and a lot of quotes. But I was able to interview some of his teammates, Raymond Chester, Mark Washington, both went to college with him at Morgan State. But what I really wanted to interview Willie about was esoteric things like, you were in college when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. How did you feel about that? What were you thinking at that time? Did your coach cancel practice? What all happened during that? Things like that would get you to understand, his mindset at that time as a very young man. And then I wanted to ask him more about his business enterprises after he retired from football. And unfortunately, I never could. And the book was my toughest book to write altogether, I think. And it's not as good as it could have been had Willie participated in it.
Is he just a shy person, or what? Why did he say no?
I kind of think that he wanted to write his own memoirs, and then he's also very good friends with a friend of mine, Michael McCambridge, who, grew up a Kansas City Chiefs fan. And I think Willie probably thought that Michael was going to write a book on him. And Michael still may at sometime in the future. I don't know. But I had already gotten the go-ahead and the contract from the publisher. So I had to go with what I had, and, unfortunately, Willie didn't participate in it. But like I said, I had a lot of transcripts from NFL films to draw on, and that was very helpful.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was just kind of mumbling. It's just I've always thought I'm a different style writer than like Bob or any of the other people who contribute to Gridiron Greats. I take a more analytical approach. I tend to write about stuff that I know about, and I don't think I've ever heard about someone who had a publisher approach them and just say we're after something with a social topic, and obviously so a very interesting story. That was cool.
It was kind of weird because like I was in Ohio at the time and I was in a truck stop, and I don't even have a truck. It was one of those in interstate places where you pull over and rest over, and there's always somebody knocking on your window asking you for $5 to help fix his radiator or something like that. But anyway, I'm there and I'm reading these emails, and it's like. The first name I thought of was Willie Lanier, the first African-American middle linebacker in pro football history. And no one, to my knowledge, has written a book on him before me. I didn't think that anyone did. Right. So that's the one key thing. If you're going to try and write a book, do your best to write about something that no one else has written. And that's not easy because sometimes you can get 3 and 4 chapters done, and then all of a sudden somebody beats you to the punch, and that's happened to me before too. That's happened.
Exactly.
To me, but it actually happened to me twice already. So you really have to try and find somebody that if you're going to write a biography, you're probably not. I don't think I have a good chance of writing a biography of Tom Brady. My odds are very slim.
Or Bill Parcells. I mean, not Bill Parcells, Belichick. Bill Belichick. Nobody will be writing about him.
But here's a Belichick story. I got a Belichick story for you. I'll hurry up because I know you guys are running short. I sent a copy of my 70s book to Belichick because I knew he was a football historian. And he sent me back a letter thanking me so much for sending it to him. And he said that he would read it when he gets a chance, but I forget what word he misspelled one of the words in his letter. So
exactly. All right, we are getting a little short on time. We've got a few more questions. Joe, any interesting story besides what you shared so far in writing these 3 books? Anything that really stands out completely more than anything else that you've looked at?
stands out to me the most was how many people really enjoyed the 70s book. I couldn't believe when 1,600 people bought it. I thought that just flabbergasted me. So I kind of knew that there's an audience out there for football history.
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah. You're talking to two of them right now.
Yeah.
Most definitely. I agree with that 100%.
Mm-hmm. That's what stands out.
I'm curious, Joe. This show is obviously, Gridiron Greats. You've read Bob's, publication, Gridiron Greats, but most of this stems from, collecting. I'm a football card collector, so's Bob. We were talking about unopened wax prior and sheets and stuff. Do you collect? Kids growing up in the 70s, a lot of collectibles. Do you collect football cards or memorabilia or anything?
I don't collect cards. Lately, though, I've been trying to collect football helmets from the 70s.
Oh, wow.
The problem with that is that it's darn near impossible to say that this was used in a game. Darn near impossible. There are certain things that you can look into for provenance and stuff, but I'm a neophyte when it comes to it. If it looks kind of dirty, people will say, "Yeah, it was used in the Immaculate Reception game." And no, it's not. It's a Chargers helmet, buddy. So you guys know frauds when you see them, but anyway, they look nice. So that's what I've been trying to I don't have a lot of them, but I have a few, and I like to try and see if I can capture division by division. I have all the ones from the old AFC West. Don't have a Seattle yet, but Seattle didn't come out until '76, so it's not a complete series.
All right. We were in the NFC West when we first came out, so
that's right. That's right.
Yep.
For 1 year.
Yeah,
for 1 year. Yep.
That's what.
Tampa Bay switched.
Joe, we're almost out of time. What a great story you have with these 3 books, and I do appreciate reviewing them, and they're very, very enlightening. I did enjoy them all. I also got to say, I'm really glad. I'll go public saying it for the 100th time. I'm really glad somebody wrote a book on the 72 Packers and actually looked at Divine and really state through real interviews and real commentary from the players and the coaches and the people who worked there during that time frame.
Well,
they could have done a much better job with the coach,
Well, I agree. And, in fact, if they would have let Bart Starr continue to call the plays, there's not a player on that team that won't tell you that they would have gone to the Super Bowl. I don't know how they would have done with the Dolphins. But I'm going to try to get ESPN to do a 30 for 30 on it. I don't know if I can, get them to do it, but I'm going to try. So.
Yeah, that'd be very, very, very interesting.
Or a football life, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Joe, thanks for being on. Again, real quick, anybody looking for any of these 3 books, where should they go to pick them up?
Best place, websites, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, BooksAMillion.com. Those are the 3 main ones.
Okay. If you don't have these books, I highly recommend them to any of our listening audience who is looking for something to do in their downtime. And these are 3 great books, and I appreciate it. Joe, thanks for being on this evening. We appreciate it.
Hey, likewise, Bob and Joe, thanks for having me on. I had a blast.
Thank you.
Joe Zagorski. Joe, real quick, we're down to less than 2 minutes. Real quick, wrap up. What'd you pick up on tonight's show?
What a passionate collector. I absolutely love that. I'm always jealous of someone. I can sit down and write, and I owe you a Gridiron article, or else I'm going to lose my senior contributing status one of these days, Captain.
That's right.
But I'm just always impressed with someone who can I'm always impressed with someone who's just a good writer like that. So it was good to have him on. What a great guest.
Yeah, I truly, again, like I said, I get a lot of books in the mail unsolicited to review, and I do review a lot of them. Usually we got 1 or 2 reviews in every issue, but again, these 3 books that he's written, superior quality, great story. His first book on the 70s, finally a year-by-year view. That's the type of book I like to read. The Packer book goes without saying, great book. And I did really enjoy reading about Willie Lanier. I learned a lot of stuff that I really didn't know about the guy. And I'm just shocked that he wouldn't want to, contribute to a book like that. It doesn't make sense to me. But then again, it is what it is, and that's it. All right, we're down to about a minute. Hopefully we're going to have a couple more shows this month. I'm lining up a few individuals to be on. Joe, any other final thoughts?
Just happy to be back, Captain. Happy to hear your voice dragging out, his football. Just happy to be back.
Yeah, and, one real quick comment in 10 seconds. A couple people have asked me about the National. I'm really thinking that it's probably going to be postponed to a different time. I just think it's just not going to happen. I can't see it happening anytime soon. Again, I could be completely wrong, but then again, I don't know how many people are going to want to go there. You know what I mean? So we'll see what happens. I know that they put on their website that they're exploring other dates also if need be, but I know no decision will be made until July. So it'll be interesting to see. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a few days and/or a week with another episode. Take care.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Each week, the official Football Learning Academy podcast will take you deep into the history of pro football through interviews with players, coaches, or administrators in the NFL, as well as interviews with Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors, authors, and historians. You'll learn how the game evolved and important moments that shaped the sport into what it is today. And don't miss the Pro Football History Nugget of the Week. Listen to the official Football Learning Academy podcast on the Sports History Network.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.